Hey there, and welcome. Today we are jumping into a market structure that is, well, pretty much everywhere you look. From the bookstore on the corner to your favorite coffee shop, we're talking about monopolistic competition. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a total contradiction, right? How can something be a monopoly and competitive at the same time? But you're about to see it's actually the perfect way to describe this really interesting hybrid market that lives right in between the two extremes.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to unravel that whole competitive monopoly puzzle. Then we'll get right into the nitty-gritty graphs, and these are super important to see how a firm operates in the short run and the long run. After that, we'll put it head-to-head with perfect competition, which is a must-know comparison for any exam. Then we'll talk about advertising, and finally, we'll wrap it all up with a handy summary table that puts all four market structures side by side. Ready? Let's do this.
All right, first up, what on earth is a competitive monopoly? The name itself just sounds confusing. To really get our heads around this, let's start with an example you'll definitely recognize.
Just picture yourself walking into a big bookstore. I mean, on the one hand, it feels like the most competitive place ever, right? You've got thousands of different authors, different publishers, all fighting for your money. But on the other hand, every single one of those books is different. A new John Grisham novel is not the same thing as a Julia Child cookbook. That uniqueness gives the publisher a little bit of market power, kind of like a tiny monopoly over that one specific book.
And that leads us to the big question. What do you call a market like this? It's got bits of competition, but it's also got bits of monopoly. It's clearly not a pure monopoly with just one seller, but since the products aren't identical, it's not perfect competition either. It has to be something else.
And that something else is monopolistic competition. It all boils down to these three key features. First, you've got many sellers. Just like in perfect competition, they're all competing for the same customers. Second, and this is the monopolistic part, you have product differentiation. Every firm's product is a little unique. And third, you have free entry and exit. This is a huge deal because it's the competitive force that, as we'll see, crushes long-run profit.
This chart is a great way to see the big picture. You can categorize any market by asking just two questions. First, how many firms are there? If it's just one, you've got a monopoly. If it's a few, it's an oligopoly. If there are many firms, you move to the second question. Are their products identical or are they different? If they're identical, like wheat or milk, that's perfect competition. But if they're differentiated, think restaurants, hair salons, clothing stores, boom, you're right here in monopolistic competition.
Okay, section 2. Now that we know what this market looks like, let's zoom in on just one of those firms. How does a single restaurant or bookstore decide how much to produce and what price to set to make the most money possible? All right, let's get into these graphs because this is where the magic happens. Since each firm has a unique product, it faces a downward sloping demand curve, just like a pure monopolist would. To sell more, it has to lower its price. That also means its marginal revenue curve, the money it gets from selling one more unit, is always going to be below its demand curve. Now, every firm has costs, right? You have your marginal cost, the cost of making one more unit, and your average total cost. So what's the golden rule for maximizing profit? It's always, always, always to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. You find that sweet spot where the MR and MC curves cross. Now look at panel A, the firm produces that quantity, then goes straight up to the demand curve to find the price it can charge. And at that price, it's higher than the average cost. That shaded box, that's pure economic profit. But now look at panel B. The logic's the same, produce where MR equals MC. But this time, maybe demand is weak or costs are high, so the price is below the average cost. And that shaded box, well, that represents a loss.
But here's the thing. Those short-run profits or losses, they're not going to stick around. And that's because of that third rule we talked about, free entry and exit. This is what pushes the market to its final destination, the long-run equilibrium.
It really makes perfect sense when you think about it. If firms are raking in profits like we saw in that first graph, what happens? Other people see that and say, hey, I want a piece of that action. So new firms enter the market. A new Italian restaurant opens up down the street. That means more choices for customers, which steals some demand from the existing firms. Their demand curve shifts to the left, and their profits start to shrink. This whole process keeps happening until the profits are completely wiped out. And of course, the opposite is true for losses. If firms are losing money, they'll close down, and the remaining firms get more customers.
And this dance of firms entering and leaving continues until we hit this point, the long-run equilibrium. Now this graph, this is the one you need to tattoo on your brain for the exam. See what's happened? So many new firms entered that our original firm's demand curve has been pushed all the way to the left. It keeps shifting until it just kisses the average total cost curve, its tangent. Why is that tangency point so important? Well, the firm is still producing where MR equals MC, but at that exact quantity, the price it can charge is now exactly the same as its average total cost. Price equals ATC. So for every unit it sells, the money it brings in is exactly what it costs to make. Economic profit is zero. Nada. There's no incentive for anyone else to enter and no reason for anyone to leave.
So, okay, long-run profits are zero. That sounds just like perfect competition, doesn't it? Well, yes and no. They both end up at zero profit, but how they get there and what it looks like is totally different. There are two huge differences that you absolutely have to know.
This slide is perfect because it puts the two outcomes right next to each other. On the left, you've got our monopolistic competitor. On the right, a perfectly competitive firm. They're both making zero economic profit in the long run, sure, but look at them. They operate in fundamentally different ways. We're going to zero in on two key distinctions you can literally see in these graphs: excess capacity and the markup on price.
Okay, difference number one, excess capacity. Let's look at the firm on the right first, the perfectly competitive one. See how it's producing at the absolute lowest point of its average total cost curve? That's the most efficient point of production possible. We call it the efficient scale. Now look at our monopolistically competitive firm on the left. Because its demand curve is sloped, its zero profit point doesn't happen at the bottom of the ATC curve. It happens on the downward sloping part. This means it has excess capacity. It could make more stuff and lower its average cost per item, but it doesn't. Why? Because to sell those extra items, it would have to lower its price, and that would end up being unprofitable.
And that brings us to difference number two, the markup. For that perfectly competitive firm, price is exactly equal to marginal cost. The profit on the very last unit sold is zero. They don't really care if they get one more customer or not. But for our monopolistically competitive firm, things are different. Because of that downward sloping demand curve, the price is always higher than the marginal cost. That gap between price and marginal cost is the markup. And that markup is why a restaurant is always thrilled to see you walk in the door, or why a clothing store is eager to make another sale. That extra customer is pure profit on the margin. It's a totally different mindset.
Okay, so this market structure isn't perfectly efficient like perfect competition is. And that leads us to a really important question. Is it actually good for society? What about all the advertising that comes along with it?
Well, there are two main sources of inefficiency we need to talk about. First, because price is higher than marginal cost, you get a deadweight loss, just like with a monopoly. There are some customers out there who value the good more than what it costs to make, but they still don't buy it because the price is too high. Second, you can argue that the number of firms in the market might not be ideal. When a new firm enters, it creates two different effects or externalities. For us consumers, it's great, more variety. That's a positive externality. But for the existing businesses, it's a negative one. They call it the business stealing externality. And the market doesn't have a perfect way to balance those two things.
And how do all these firms with slightly different products fight for your attention? They advertise a lot. It's pretty wild. For firms that sell things like brand name sodas or designer clothes, spending 10 to 20% of all their revenue on advertising is totally normal. So, is all that advertising just a big waste of money? Well, it's debatable. Some critics say it just manipulates our tastes, but defenders argue it gives us useful information and actually makes markets more competitive. And this old case study about eyeglasses is fantastic evidence for that. Back in the day, some states actually banned ads for eyeglasses. And look at the results. In the states that had the ban, the average price was over 20% higher. In this case, advertising seemed to create more price competition, which was great for consumers.
All right, let's bring it all home. We're going to wrap up with a final summary that puts everything we've talked about into context with all the other market structures. Think of this as your ultimate revision tool.
This table right here is your cheat sheet. Seriously, you should screenshot this. Notice the things that are the same at the top. All firms, no matter the market, want to maximize profits, and they all do it by producing where MR equals MC. But then look at the differences. You can really see how monopolistic competition is this cool hybrid. Like a monopoly, price is greater than marginal cost, but like perfect competition, there are many firms. Entry is free, and in the long run, economic profits get competed away to zero. It really, truly is the market in the middle. So I'll leave you with this last thing to chew on for your exam. These monopolistically competitive markets give us an amazing amount of choice, right? We have countless restaurants, endless book options, so many styles of clothes. But that variety comes with a cost, that excess capacity, and that markup over marginal cost. So the big $1 million question is it worth it?
Is all that choice worth the inefficiency? That is the fundamental trade-off of this market in the middle.